Okay.
We're live.
We're live. Hi. Hi there, land of Facebook, and welcome to our first proper Facebook Live webinar event. I'm not sure what we call it really.
A live event.
Live event. So I'm Emma Bridger, founder of People Lab, and I'm joined today by my colleague Katie Austin. And we're delighted today to be talking to you about the findings from our enterprise social networks research, which we've been running over sort of the last few months. So going to take about 20 minutes or so to run through the findings, and if you've got any questions while we're talking, please post them and we will do our best to answer them. At the end of the recording, obviously you'll be able to watch it again if you want to, and also have access to slides, and we will be publishing a full report in the new year as well. So I'm just going to get stuck straight into the research findings. So a little bit of background about this piece of research. It's been something that we've been wanting to do for some time now, and is really looking about the impact of enterprise social networks on engagement and well-being. So I'm sure you're all aware of the kind of rise of social media over the past 15 years or so in the UK and worldwide. I think the UK's got something like 38 million active social media followers, people using it at the moment, and Facebook's got something like 1.79 billion users worldwide. So, you know, it's ubiquitous, it's out there, most people use it. However, there's been very little research into the impacts of platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, etc. on our well-being. Do they make us happier? Do they make us more connected? Or do they make us more depressed? And I guess over the last sort of 2 or 3 years, we've kind of seen the evidence base rise in terms of external social media. So kind of for every study that says, you know, Facebook makes you feel better about yourself because you put your best self on there, and we're all like looking at nice pictures of ourselves, there'll be another study that says actually it can make you more depressed because you have the whole fear of missing out thing, and everybody's having this amazing life except you. So the evidence is really mixed at the moment. But when you look at the impact of social media used within an organisation, so enterprise social networks, there is very little research, which is why we wanted to kind of get stuck into this space and say, you know, is there an opportunity for enterprise social networks to influence our engagement, to make us happy at work? What are the risks? What are the issues? How is the rise of using ESNs at work going to change the way we work, going to change the way we organise ourselves, going to change our even leadership behaviours? Lots of really big questions, and really very, very little research that's been done in this area. And in fact, if anybody knows of any, please let us know, because we are doing literature reviews on an ongoing basis and we're really struggling to find anything. So hopefully this piece of research is one of the first pieces of research that will start to plug that gap. I'm really excited to share with you the results today. Okay, so I'm going to get stuck straight in. What did we want to find out? So we wanted to find out, you know, who's using ESNs, what sort of companies are using them, what are they doing in this space, and why and how are they using them? What are the objectives? What sort of, you know, what's the sort of motivation for using them? And then, what are the impacts of using ESNs on both engagement and well-being? So People Lab, we are all about employee engagement, so that's a really big question for us. We got quite excited about answering it. So who took part? So it's the first kind of phase of the research, really. So we had 106 organisations take part. I will say, right from the off here, we would like more. We want more and more organisations and more people to take part, because the bigger data set we can get, the better the conclusions we make. But we had enough organisations take part to give us some interesting first insights into this area. Around 72% of the people that took part were in managerial levels and above. Pretty much every sector and industry was represented in the people who took part, and mostly individuals were kind of graduate, postgraduate backgrounds. And 42% of the organisations had more than 5,000 employees. So just a little bit of gives you a bit of a flavour of the sort of companies that got involved in the research. And the results are in, and some very interesting results they are, I have to say. So First of all, we wanted to look at some more traditional communication questions around sort of channels and accessibility. Um, so we asked how people are receiving their information. So are we starting to see, kind of more and more people using ESNs, apps, etc.? And I guess the picture at the moment is probably pretty much as you would expect. So online kind of email, intranet still rule, as they have done for a number of years. In the middle, you've got the more traditional internal comms kind of channels. And right at the other end, you've got 11% of people who responded to the survey said they're using a company app. We predict that over the next few years, we'll see that rise pretty significantly, but that's the current landscape in which we're operating in when it comes to internal comms. In terms of how people are accessing their information, there's lots of talk, has been for a number of years, about the whole bring your own device. I read a really interesting study this week, or I think it was comment this week on Twitter. Can't remember who it's from, might have been from Rachel Miller, talking about accessibility at work, and actually in a few years' time that's not even going to be a question. Comms will be agnostic when it comes to accessibility. But you'll see from this diagram here that you've got a split between people using their own laptop, but 1 in 5 using their own devices. So I think that's kind of higher than I thought it would be. So 1 in 5 saying, I use my own personal device to access company information. 2% don't have any access at all, which is interesting. I think, again, we'll see that picture change quite significantly over the coming sort of months and years. And in terms of asking about, do you have an ESN and do you use it? Use is pretty significant. So almost half of the organisations that took part in our research have an ESN. I was actually higher than I thought it would be. I've spoken to other colleagues in the industry who thought it was lower than they would have expected. So I think it kind of depends where you're coming from. It was certainly higher than I thought it would be. Be interested to know what you think. Is it higher or lower than you thought it would be? But almost a half said they have an ESN. But what was really interesting was that of those that have an ESN, 93% access it regularly. And of those that have it, 74% say they use it every day. So of those that do have it, use is very frequent, or much more frequent than we would have expected. Again, be interested to hear your views as to whether or not that result is as you would have expected. Okay, and platforms. So what platforms are people using? So I guess, again, probably no surprises that Yammer is still ruling there. So just over half say Yammer is their ESN of choice. Jive coming in almost 20%, and then Chatter next. So those are kind of the top 3, and I think that's pretty much what we would have expected. What we did see is in the other comments box, there were quite a few people starting to talk about Slack, and I think that's quite a new, well, it's not a new app, of course, but that's something that's kind of new to the world of internal comms. People are talking about Slack a lot more. And again, there are so many new products, new providers, new solutions on the marketplace. It'll be interesting to see how that changes over the coming months and years, and which solutions kind of come out on top and stay there, and which don't. So let's watch this space, I think. We wanted to find out how people use the company's ESN. So those almost 50% who say, yeah, company has it and I use it regularly, so, what are you using it for? And this is really interesting. So 79% said they use it to collaborate with others, which I think is really great news. We know that kind of building networks, building relationships, collaboration is absolutely critical for engagement at work. So big tick there. 68% say they use it in a more traditional, I suppose, intranet type of way to locate expertise or to help them tackle a piece of work or solve a problem. Employee voice starting to sort of register there. So 56% said use it to make my voice heard and to build relationships and networks. 53% to take part in an online community, and 50% to interact with like-minded people. And when we asked, okay, so that's how you use it, but what's your experience of using it in this way? So is it any good for that? So you might say I use it to collaborate, but actually it's really terrible as a tool for collaboration. What we found is that actually people think that ESNs really do tick the boxes on those different ways of using it. So a huge 94% say it helps them to build relationships, which is great news for an engagement tool. 86% said that helps to locate knowledge and connect with like-minded people and to communicate more effectively. So again, this is really good news for engagement, because we know that good communication is a key driver of engagement. So anything that can help us communicate more effectively has got to be good news for engagement. 85% said it helps to feel part of a community or group. And again, as the world of work is changing and there's more remote working, could this be a tool to help people feel more involved in an organisation and more connected to an organisation? Again, these are good questions to ask from an engagement point of view. And 85% also said it helps them collaborate with others, and 83% helps them build a network. So it's not just that employees are using ESNs in these ways, they're saying actually it's really good at doing this stuff, which is great news. Okay, so moving on to some of the more sort of psychological questions. We looked at the relationship between employees and work. Sorry, a bit heavy-handed there, click forward too quickly. We wanted to ask about how organisations measure engagement. And I guess the reason I wanted to ask that is we have seen through our own work and through what we do with clients, organisations really starting to move away from the kind of annual survey event approach to a much more sort of ongoing listening strategy. And clients asking us a lot more about, what services, providers, solutions are out there, what apps are out there, what's going to help me with my listening strategy. So we wanted to kind of test that and say, are we starting to see this with other organisations? And although, the engagement survey is still the kind of predominant form of measurement, we've certainly got some other forms of measurement coming in there, like focus groups, pulse checks, etc. And again, I would probably put money on the fact that over the sort of coming months and years, we're going to see all of these new players in the market who've got great apps to measure engagement in an ongoing way become more and more popular. And again, it just remains to be seen which one will kind of end up dominating and which ones won't. So again, watch this space. I guess the critical questions we wanted to find answers to, though, was does using ESN impact engagement and well-being? To answer this, we used a number of tools. So first of all, we included some fairly typical kind of employee engagement index questions that you might find in any number of engagement surveys. So these will look very familiar to you. So, questions around, employee net promoter score questions. So would you recommend it? Are you proud of where you work? Do you feel an attachment? Are you inspired, etc.? And you'll see the overall percentages for each of those questions and a kind of an average at the bottom. And then we looked at the differences between those people who are using enterprise social networks and those people who aren't using enterprise social networks. And there is a slight difference. It's only 5 percentage points, but certainly worth digging deeper into. So we see that those that use ESNs have a slightly higher engagement index score than those who don't use ESNs. Now, of course, ever the psychologist, I have to point out that there's no causation here. It's just some interesting observations. We don't know why we are seeing that, but I think at this early stage in this research, it's given us food for thought. It's made us think perhaps there is something in this. We definitely want to delve deeper and find out more about the insight we're seeing here. So some interesting early findings here that on the face of it, it looks as if those people using ESNs are slightly more engaged than those not using ESNs. So interesting first finding. Now, you don't need me to tell you that the problem with engagement is that there are 50 plus different definitions, and the questions that I just threw up are typical of the sorts of questions you'd ask in an engagement survey, but they are not, they've not been validated by kind of any academic institution, if you like. And in fact, there is one questionnaire out there, the Utrecht Work Engagement Scale from Chevalier and Baker, which is the one sort of validated psychologically robust measure of what we call work engagement. So I wanted to include some of these more robust measures in this study. Now, we will go into a lot more detail in this in the report, and I'm going to try and avoid getting too much of too nerdy about psychology here. But what this scale does is it looks at engagement from sort of three perspectives. It looks at has questions related to what we call vigor, which is what you and I would probably call energy, absorption, which is kind of how into my work I get. So questions around time flies when I'm at work, those sorts of questions, and dedication, which is kind of like the commitment theme, I guess. And again, what we saw here, some early findings, but we saw some differences in terms of those questions relating to vigour between those who use enterprise social networks and those who don't. So 8 percentage point difference, which is quite a big difference actually. So it seems that people using ESNs tend to have more vigour, more energy at work than those not using them. The questions related to absorption and dedication were fairly similar, but slightly higher on the don't use ESN. So what we would love to do is to really widen the participation of this research to get a lot more people involved, a lot more results in, so we can really kind of dig down into these initial findings and see if there is something there or not. But certainly interesting first findings here, and lots of kind of hypotheses whizzing around in my head as to why that might be, but needs a lot more research. The other scale that we used was a scale, again, from the world of psychology, which looks into motivation at work. This was taken from psychologist Desai and Ryan, and it's called the Work Extrinsic and Intrinsic Motivation Scale. Psychologists are nothing if not overly wordy. Now, without, again, going into all the sort of technical detail here, what this scale does is look at people's motivation at work. Are they extrinsically motivated, i.e. motivated by stuff outside of themselves, like money, like status? Are they intrinsically motivated, i.e. they're motivated by stuff that comes from within them, or are they amotivated? And we will kind of put the full findings from this scale into the report, but I guess the headlines are that we did see differences on a couple of areas. There are a number of questions in the questionnaire that you kind of use to look at a number of different sort of ways of being motivated. And what we found was that those that use ESN tended to be more what we call, tend to score high on what we call the items related to introjected regulation. Apologies, not my terminology, it's a psychologist's. And introjected regulation is, if I can try and put this simply, is essentially a form of extrinsic motivation, but it is related to self-worth. So, for example, the sorts of questions contained here that would measure this relate to things like wanting to succeed at your job because if you don't, you'd feel bad about yourself. Wanting to be good at your work because if you weren't good at your work, you'd be disappointed in yourself. And wanting to be a winner in life. So it is related to extrinsic motivation, but it is also related to self-worth. So essentially, the reason it's extrinsic motivation is the cause of the behaviour is external rather than internal. Again, lots of sort of thoughts as to, well, what the hell does this mean, whizzing around in my head, but we're going to be looking at that in the next phase of the research. The other part of this, the motivation at work scale that came out different for those that use ESNs versus those that don't use ESNs was around what we call amotivation. Amotivation is essentially lacking in motivation, so no motivation, and is related to what psychologists call learned helplessness. That was much higher in those who don't use ESN than those that do use ESN. And again, be interested in your thoughts as to why you think we might be seeing this. And just to bring that to life, some of the questions that we asked to measure this were, for example, I don't seem to be able to manage the important tasks related to my work. We're provided with unrealistic working conditions. Too much of it is expected of us. So definitely one that you can see is related to engagement, and it seems to be higher in those that don't use it than those that do use it. So some interesting early findings coming out there. The other thing we wanted to look at was well-being at work. So going back to the sort of studies that are looking at, things like Facebook and how it impacts people, some studies say it contributes to depression. Some studies say actually it makes you feel happier. So we want to ask some well-being questions around sort of stress and well-being. And overall, we found, again, early findings that ESN users seem to have slightly higher levels of well-being compared to those that don't use ESN. So, for example, those that do use ESN are more likely to report that they are feeling capable of making decisions. They are more likely to overcome difficulties. They are less likely to think of themselves as worthless, and they're more likely to feel happy at work. So again, very early signs that ESN use could somehow be related to wellbeing at work, and we don't know how or why yet, because I say this isn't we're not using statistics that look at cause here. We're just looking at kind of trends and themes, but definitely something that we would like to dig a little bit deeper into. Okay, have we got any questions coming in, Katie, yet?
No questions as yet.
No questions.
But if there are any, just type them in the comments.
So just to conclude then, in a nutshell, what have we found? We found that ESN use is frequent. So people that have ESN seem to be using it more than we'd expected. And I know that the caveat on this is that we've gone out to a certain population. They might be people that are more engaged. And I've spoken to plenty of people and plenty of clients who have tools such as Yammer and Jive who are saying we can't get anyone to use it. So I know this isn't the case everywhere. But certainly from this research, we're finding that there's a high frequency of use. And that the kind of primary purpose of using the tool really for the people that responded to our study is for collaboration. We have found in this initial piece of research that ESN users have more pride at work, they have greater attachment to the company, and they have more vigour, i.e. energy at work as well. We found that they are motivated differently to non-ESN users, so differences in terms of what motivates these people. And we don't know cause and effect, but we're just seeing some initial differences. And we've also found early indications that ESN users are having higher levels of well-being. And again, we need a bigger data set, and we need more people to get involved, and we need to start looking at using statistics that can measure more causality. But I think in terms of a first piece of research, bearing in mind that there has been nothing done in this space yet, really, really interesting findings, and we are really looking forward to hearing what our network says about this, getting some debate going on it. So the more we can get people involved and talking about these results, and does it kind of match what you would expect to see, or are your experiences completely different, and really upping the response rate and getting more companies involved so we can really start to get some sort of compelling stats out of this to really see if these initial findings we've found here, the initial findings we've got here, are correct. So I think that's pretty much it from us. Yeah. So if you've got any questions, drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you. This presentation will be available online as well, so if you want to share it, please feel free. And the full report is going to be coming out in January, so we'll be sharing that with all of our network and all of our users. And as I said, really interested to hear what you think and getting more people involved in the discussion. So that's it from us, and not so sunny Brighton today. Thank you very much for listening, and hope to hear from you. Thanks, bye.